Ethan glanced at Claire, and she finally looked back at him, her eyes soft and full of something unspoken, a mix of gratitude and emotional weight. "Thank you for catching me," she whispered, her voice calmer now, but deeper, more meaningful. Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to say more, because something about the moment still sat warm and heavy in his chest. She held his gaze for a second longer, and there was a hint of something there, something he didn't fully understand yet, but felt all the same, as if the moment they shared against the wall had quietly changed something between them. And though neither of them knew what to do with that feeling, both of them knew it wasn't going to disappear. Claire Dawson had always been part of Ethan's memories, tucked quietly at the edge of family gatherings, community events, and holiday dinners, where she helped his grandmother with everything from arranging chairs to baking enough pies for a small army. And though Ethan had never admitted it to himself out loud, there was something about her that always made him pause just a second longer than he should have. Something warm and steady in the way she moved through the world, as if she'd learned long ago how to carry both joy and sadness, without letting either break her. She wasn't much older than him, mid-40s, maybe 45 at most, but she carried herself with a kind of thoughtful grace that didn't feel like age, only experience. When he was younger, he'd seen her as simply one of his grandmother's closest friends. Someone kind enough to remember his birthday and ask about his job. Someone who gave gentle advice without sounding like she was lecturing. But now, standing in the living room after helping her sit down and seeing her ankle wrapped carefully with a loose bandage, he realized he had been pretending not to notice her for years. And the strangest part was that she had always treated him the same way she treated everyone else, with warmth and sincerity. But today felt different. Today felt like she had let him see a part of her she usually kept hidden. She sat on the sofa, breathing slowly through the fading ache in her ankle, trying not to look embarrassed, though he could tell from the soft red color in her cheeks that she was still replaying the moment he'd caught her. She brushed a stray piece of hair behind her ear and forced a small smile. And Ethan couldn't help noticing the way her eyes softened whenever she looked at him, as if she was grateful in a way she didn't know how to express. His grandmother, busy in the kitchen again, called out instructions about elevating the foot and drinking water. And Claire tried to laugh at the fussing, saying it wasn't as serious as it looked. But Ethan could see the tension in her face, the leftover fear from the fall. She apologized again for causing trouble, and he shook his head, telling her she never caused trouble, that she had been helping long before he showed up. That made her smile. Really smile. One of those gentle expressions that made the room feel warmer. When his grandmother left again to find a better wrap for the ankle, the quiet between them grew longer, more meaningful. Claire looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers lightly as if she was trying to gather her words. She finally said, "I didn't mean to scare you earlier. I wasn't expecting that to happen." Ethan told her he wasn't scared at all, only worried she was hurt. She looked at him for a long moment after that, her eyes holding something like appreciation mixed with something he couldn't name. There was a softness in her expression that made him want to step closer. But he didn't, afraid of crossing a line he didn't fully understand yet. Instead, he sat on the chair across from her. Leaning forward just enough to show he was present. Listening, she thanked him again. This time, slower, deeper, like she wanted him to know the words weren't casual. She admitted that things like this frustrated her, not because of the pain, but because she hated depending on people. She said she'd learned to take care of herself after years of handling too many things alone. And the way she said it carried a quiet ache that made Ethan see her in a new way as someone who held more strength in her heart than most people realized. He told her it was okay to lean on someone occasionally, that even the strongest people needed that sometimes, and she smiled again, this time with a hint of sadness. She told him she admired how close he was to his grandmother, how he always helped without being asked. He shrugged it off, saying it was nothing. But she insisted it wasn't nothing. That kindness, like his, mattered more than people admitted. The room fell into a softer quiet after that. The kind that felt comfortable, like two people sitting inside a shared pause. Ethan noticed the little things. How Claire kept adjusting the blanket on her lap even though it was perfectly fine. How her breathing had steadied, but her cheek still held that shy pink color. How she kept glancing at him and then looking away quickly as if she wasn't sure what she was allowed to feel. He wondered if she felt the same strange pull he felt. This unexpected awareness that had started the moment he caught her and seemed to grow every time their eyes met. He didn't know what to do with the feeling. He didn't want to misread the situation, didn't want to make things awkward for his grandmother or for Claire, but he couldn't ignore the way his chest felt warm every time she spoke softly or the way his thoughts kept drifting to her, even when he tried to focus on something else. Claire finally broke the silence, telling him she had always thought he would move far away one day, maybe to a big city like Seattle or Chicago, and she sounded surprised he still lived nearby. Ethan laughed gently, saying life didn't pull him as far as he once thought it would. She nodded like she understood that more deeply than she let on. She admitted that the town felt like home to her because of people like his grandmother, people who made life feel steady. She hesitated before adding, and people like you. Her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan felt something shift inside him at those words. Something subtle but undeniable. He wanted to ask what she meant, but she looked down quickly, almost shy, and he didn't want to push her. Instead, he reached out to adjust the pillow under her injured foot. And when his hand brushed hers accidentally, she froze for half a second. Not in fear, but in something like surprise, and then she relaxed, offering a small, grateful smile that made his heartbeat stumble all over again. His grandmother returned a moment later with a better wrap and a lecture about resting for the rest of the day, and Claire listened politely, nodding while Ethan sat beside them, trying to steady the thoughts rushing through his head. Claire insisted she didn't want to be an inconvenience, but his grandmother told her she was family. And that word family hit Ethan unexpectedly, making him realize just how long Claire had been part of their world. How familiar she had always felt. As his grandmother wrapped Claire's ankle, Ethan caught Claire watching him again, her expression softer than before, almost grateful in a way that felt personal. When his grandmother stepped out once more to answer the doorbell, Claire exhaled slowly, letting her shoulders sink back into the sofa. Ethan asked softly if she was okay, and she nodded, saying, "I'm just thinking. Today didn't go the way I planned." He replied, "Me neither." And something in the way he said it made her look at him with a deeper kind of understanding. She whispered that moments like these made life feel strange. How something small could change the rhythm of a day. How closeness could arrive without warning. Ethan didn't know how to answer without revealing too much. So, he just nodded, hoping she could see what he couldn't say out loud. The last quiet pause between them stretched long and warm, filled with unspoken thoughts and hesitant hope. And though they didn't touch, the connection felt strong enough to bridge the distance. Claire finally looked away when his grandmother called for Ethan from the kitchen. But before he stood up, Claire spoke softly, almost too softly. "Thank you again for being there." And when he met her eyes, he knew the moment they shared earlier wasn't going to disappear from either of their memories. Claire tried to stand on her own again after a few minutes, insisting she didn't want to keep everyone busy with her accident. But the moment her foot touched the floor, a sharp tremble ran through her ankle. And before Ethan could even think, she grabbed his shirt with a tight, instinctive hold, pulling him close enough that he felt her breath catch against his chest as she winced and whispered a soft, shaky "Wait, my ankle." And he immediately stepped in, steadying her again, guiding her carefully back toward the wall so she wouldn't lose her balance. Claire looked embarrassed, her cheeks warm, her voice low as she apologized for the 10th time. But Ethan shook his head gently, telling her she didn't need to be sorry, telling her he didn't mind helping her, telling her she could lean on him until she felt steady. She took a slow breath, looking up at him with eyes that carried both frustration and quiet trust. And for a moment, he forgot about the loose rug, the boxes, everything except the fact that she was close enough for him to feel the faint tremble in her hands. Her fingers stayed curled in his shirt longer than she meant to, and when she realized, she let go quickly, whispering another apology. But he only smiled, trying to ease her worry. She tried again to stand straighter, but her ankle reacted with a sudden jolt of pain, making her lean into him without thinking, and he caught her again, firmer this time, making sure she didn't fall. The brief closeness made time slow, her heartbeat brushing against his arm, her breath warming the side of his neck. The soft scent of vanilla and winter air clinging to her hair as she steadied herself against him. She whispered, "I'm really not usually this clumsy." Trying to lighten the moment, but her voice wavered with a mix of pain and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. And Ethan felt something inside him soften, an instinctive protectiveness he didn't expect. He told her it wasn't clumsy at all, that anyone could have stepped wrong, that he was glad he was there to catch her. She laughed a tiny shy laugh at that, but her hand slid to his arm for support once more. As she breathed through the discomfort, he guided her slowly toward the nearest chair, moving carefully so she didn't feel rushed or pressured, watching every flinch, every breath, making sure she felt safe. Claire leaned on him as they moved, the grip of her hand steadying itself around his arm, her step small and measured, her eyes sticking to the floor as if she didn't trust her legs, but trusted him completely. When they reached the chair, she hesitated before sitting, as if she didn't want the moment to end, as if there was something comforting about being held by someone she didn't usually allow herself to rely on. She looked up at him with an expression full of quiet gratitude and something more fragile, something she might never have shown if life hadn't forced her into his arms. Ethan lowered her gently into the chair, adjusting the cushion so her ankle wouldn't be strained. And she let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since the fall. But just as he moved to step back, she gripped his wrist lightly, stopping him, her eyes flicking up to his with a soft urgency that surprised them both. "Ethan, thank you," she said again. But this time, her voice was deeper, more vulnerable, carrying emotion she had been holding back all day. He nodded, unable to find the right words, and for a second, they simply looked at each other. Really looked, long enough for the room to take on a soft, private stillness. The moment felt fragile, like it could break if either of them breathed too deeply, and yet comforting enough that neither wanted to move. She finally let go of his wrist when she heard his grandmother's footsteps in the hallway. And Ethan stepped back just in time for the moment to disappear behind polite conversation and concerned questions about swelling and ice packs. Claire tried to sit straighter as his grandmother fussed over her ankle, determined not to look like someone who needed help, but every now and then her eyes drifted toward Ethan, catching him watching her with a softness she hadn't expected. When his grandmother left the room again, the quiet returned, this time even heavier, filled with leftover closeness neither of them knew how to handle. Claire cleared her throat gently, saying she felt embarrassed for nearly knocking him over. And Ethan shook his head, telling her he didn't mind at all, telling her he was just glad she was okay. She smiled at that small, shy, genuine, and Ethan felt that same strange pull again, something warm and unfamiliar that had been growing since the moment he caught her the first time. She rubbed her hands together as if trying to calm her nerves, whispering that she wasn't used to being taken care of, that she usually handled everything alone. Ethan moved a little closer without thinking, telling her she didn't have to handle everything alone today, not when he was right there and willing to help. Her eyes softened in a way that made her look younger, almost hopeful, and she nodded slowly, letting his words settle into the space between them. She admitted she hated feeling vulnerable, that it made her feel exposed. And Ethan gently told her that vulnerability didn't make someone weak, it only made them human. That seemed to stay with her, lingering in the air as she looked at him with a kind of warmth she wasn't hiding anymore. She whispered that she didn't know how she would have gotten through the moment without him, and Ethan felt the honesty of her words settle deep inside his chest. When his grandmother came back with an ice pack, the moment broke again. But this time, something unspoken remained between them. Something neither of them pretended not to feel. As his grandmother wrapped the ankle and Claire thanked her politely, Ethan watched Claire's face carefully. The way she tried to act calm, even though her emotions were still written all over her expression. When his grandmother stepped out to answer the door again, Claire exhaled softly and looked at Ethan with a small smile that held more meaning than any of her words. She whispered, "Today surprised me." And Ethan nodded, replying gently, "Yeah, me too." And in that quiet, brief exchange, something changed. Something subtle, but unmistakable. Something that neither of them fully understood yet, but both felt deeply enough that the room seemed to hold its breath with them. After Claire's ankle was wrapped and carefully propped on a pillow, Ethan stayed nearby, pretending to straighten boxes and tidy loose decorations. But in truth, he kept glancing toward her, unable to stop himself from checking if she was still in pain or if she needed anything. And each time their eyes met, she quickly looked down as if she didn't know how to handle the quiet connection growing between them. His grandmother insisted Claire rest until she felt strong enough to stand, then bustled out to greet a neighbor at the door, leaving the two of them alone again in a room filled with warm afternoon light and soft silence that made every tiny sound feel heavier. Claire sat with her hands in her lap, fingers nervously brushing against one another, 1,000 unspoken thoughts flickering across her face. She finally lifted her eyes and said quietly, "I didn't mean to cause so much trouble today." And Ethan shook his head instantly, telling her she didn't cause trouble at all, telling her he was glad he'd been there, telling her he would have done the exact same thing for anyone he cared about. She paused at that last word, cared, and something in her expression softened as if the word had landed somewhere deep inside her. She admitted she felt silly for falling, silly for leaning on him, silly for letting him see her in a moment of weakness she rarely showed anyone. Ethan sat on the edge of the coffee table in front of her, so she didn't have to turn her head, and he told her gently that everyone had vulnerable moments, that hers didn't make her any less strong, that she didn't have to carry everything alone all the time. She looked at him with a mix of gratitude and disbelief, as if no one had said something like that to her in years. Her voice lowered when she said, "I'm not used to people noticing things about me." And Ethan found himself leaning slightly closer, speaking softly as he told her he noticed more than she thought, that he had always seen how much she did for his grandmother in the community. How quietly she supported everyone without ever asking for anything in return. She blinked fast, her eyes turning shiny for a moment before she looked down at her hands again, whispering, "That's kind of you to say." Ethan didn't push her to meet his eyes. He just stayed near, giving her space while letting her know he wasn't going anywhere. The room stayed warm and gentle, filled with a calm that felt like it belonged only to them. After a moment, Claire quietly admitted that she had been feeling lonely lately. Not because she didn't have friends, but because she often felt like she was living life in the background, always helping, rarely being helped. Ethan listened carefully, his expression soft, and he told her that she didn't deserve to be in the background, that she had more presence, kindness, and strength than most people he knew. She smiled at that, a real slow smile that made her look both beautiful and vulnerable in a way Ethan wasn't expecting. She said, "You're too sweet." But the way she said it felt like she meant something deeper. Ethan shrugged lightly, saying he was only being honest, and that made her laugh softly, the first relaxed sound she'd made since the fall. When she looked at him again, there was a new warmth in her eyes, something gentle and searching. She said, "Today felt strange, but not in a bad way." Ethan nodded, agreeing quietly, telling her he felt the same, telling her he hadn't expected the day to shift the way it had, but he didn't regret any moment of it. She held his gaze longer this time, and the air between them grew thick, with something unspoken, something that felt like hope mixed with fear, something fragile yet steady. She started to say something. Ethan saw her inhale softly, as if she was gathering courage. But before the words came, his grandmother shouted from the porch, breaking the moment like a soft crack across the air. Claire looked away quickly, trying to hide the warmth in her face. And Ethan stood up slowly, not wanting to move, but knowing he had to answer. He asked gently if she needed anything before he went to help his grandmother. And she shook her head, giving him a small smile that carried a quiet message he couldn't fully read yet. He walked toward the door, but before he stepped out, he glanced back one more time. Claire was watching him with an expression she didn't hide fast enough. Something thoughtful, something tender, something that looked suspiciously like a feeling she wasn't ready to speak aloud. When their eyes met again, she didn't look away this time. She just gave him a soft, grateful smile that said everything she didn't have the courage to say yet. Ethan left the room with his heart beating a little too fast, and Claire exhaled shakily, touching her chest as if she was trying to steady the sudden rush of emotion she didn't expect. They both knew the moment wasn't finished, that something had started quietly between them, something that felt too real to ignore. And though neither of them said a word about it, both carried the same thought. Today had changed something, and whatever it was only the beginning. Ethan Walker never imagined an ordinary Thursday afternoon would turn into one of the most confusing and emotional moments of his life. But everything changed the second he stepped into his grandmother's small house in Oregon to help her prepare for a community fundraiser, only to find Claire Dawson, his grandma's closest friend, already there, sorting boxes, with that calm, warm smile she always carried. The one he tried not to think about too much. Ethan had always seen Claire as someone different, someone who felt out of place in a world that rushed too quickly. She had a quiet strength, gentle eyes, and a voice that always sounded like she was softening whatever chaos existed around her. He greeted her politely but warmly, and she returned the greeting with that soft laugh he had grown used to hearing over the years. The air felt normal, comforting even, until his grandmother stepped out to take a phone call, leaving him and Claire alone in the living room. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains, turning the place golden. And as they sorted decorations, Claire joked about how she wasn't great with arts and crafts. Ethan laughed, bending down to pick up a dropped ribbon, when suddenly he heard the sharp slide of fabric against carpet and looked up just in time to see her foot twist on the edge of a loose rug. Claire didn't scream. She only gasped. But the sound shot straight through him, and without thinking, he lunged forward, catching her by the arms. Before she could fall, her breath trembled. Her knees buckled, and he guided her quickly against the wall, steadying her body with both hands, feeling her shake in surprise. "It's okay, I've got you," he said, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. Claire tried to put weight on her foot, but the moment she shifted, she winced with a deep, soft sound that made him hold her a little closer so she wouldn't fall again. She whispered, "Wait, I can't move." And the words were simple, but something in her tone made the room change. Suddenly, everything felt closer, quieter, and strangely intimate, like the moment had pulled them out of the world and locked them into their own small space against the wall. Ethan wasn't prepared for how aware he became of the warmth of her arms beneath his hands, or how her breath brushed against his collar as she tried to steady herself. She looked embarrassed, cheeks flushed, eyes trying to avoid his, but she couldn't pull away, not without falling. So, she stayed pressed gently against his hold, vulnerable in a way he had never seen her before. He kept reassuring her, telling her she was okay. And though she nodded, he could feel the tension in her body, the mix of pain and the anxiety of being caught in such an unexpectedly close moment. She whispered that she didn't want to trouble him, that she didn't like being a burden, but he told her again and again that she wasn't, that he was glad he'd been there to catch her. He felt her slowly try to shift again, but her ankle shook too much, and she winced harder, gripping his shirt with one hand without meaning to, pulling him a breath closer. That pull, that tiny accidental tug, made his own heartbeat stumble because it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't romantic in a loud or grand way, but it was real in a way that made him aware of her in a way he had never fully allowed himself to feel before. He tried to hide the rush of emotion, focusing only on keeping her safe. She apologized again, this time quieter, almost a whisper, and he told her gently, "It's all right, Claire. Lean on me until you're ready." She nodded, letting herself relax in his hold, her fingers still clutching his shirt lightly as if she didn't fully trust her legs. The sunlight shifted across her hair, and he had to force himself not to stare at her too long, worried she would catch the thoughtfulness in his eyes. There was no time to think too deeply about it, though, because she tried again to stand on her own, only for her ankle to shake once more, and she winced so sharply that he instinctively tightened his grip, refusing to let her fall even an inch. Claire inhaled sharply as pain flashed across her face, and she whispered, "Not yet. I still can't." Her voice trembling just enough to break something small and quiet inside him, something he didn't fully understand yet. Trapped in that moment with her leaning on him, their breaths close, the world seemed to slow, and Ethan became aware of every tiny detail, the warmth of her shoulder against his chest, the faint scent of vanilla and laundry detergent in her hair, the softness of her breath, brushing his neck as she tried to steady herself, the trembling in her hand that still held on to him for support. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't helpless. She was simply human in a way he had never seen her, and the closeness of it wrapped tightly around his chest. He told her they should move slowly, that he could help her to the sofa if she wanted, and she nodded again, trusting him completely. He guided her carefully step by step, his hand still steady on her back, hers still gripping his arm. And that small connection felt heavier than he expected, like something he didn't want to let go of too soon. Every step she took sent a tiny tremor through her, and every time she flinched, he paused and waited patiently, talking to her softly to keep her calm. She told him she hated moments like this, hated feeling weak. And he shook his head, telling her she wasn't weak at all, that anyone could twist an ankle. She laughed lightly at that, though it was a shaky laugh, and thanked him again, her voice warm but strained. When they finally reached the sofa, and he helped her sit, she inhaled slowly, the relief in her expression clear. But just as he was about to ask if she needed water or ice, the front door opened and his grandmother walked back inside, full of cheerful energy, completely unaware of what had just happened. Claire quickly let go of Ethan's arm, smoothing her hair and straightening her blouse, trying to hide the flustered look on her face. While Ethan stepped back, his heartbeat still running faster than it should have. His grandmother rushed over, concerned but calm, and Ethan explained what happened, trying to keep it simple, trying not to reveal how unexpectedly emotional the moment had felt. Claire kept insisting she was fine, but she winced again when she tried to adjust her foot, and Ethan saw it immediately. His grandmother insisted on wrapping Claire's ankle, bringing out a small first aid kit, and giving advice the whole time. Claire sat quietly, grateful but slightly embarrassed, avoiding Ethan's eyes with a shy, unsure expression he wasn't used to seeing on her. When his grandmother stepped out again to get ice from the neighbor's freezer, the room fell silent.